Trig inverses. So this is a continuation of yesterday's lesson, but using an inverse is when you are finding the missing angle measure. So during yesterday's lesson, we were finding a missing side length, and during today's lesson, we use the trig values to find a missing angle. So when should you use an inverse? And I just wrote a quick note that says if you know the sine, cosine, or tangent ratio for an angle, you can use an inverse to find the measure of the angle. Use an inverse when you know two side lengths of a right triangle and you want to find the measure of one of the acute angles. So going off of yesterday's lesson, SOHCAHTOA is still going to apply. We are now going to be using the inverse key in our calculator, so I'll show you that when we get to it. But the abbreviation of SOHCAHTOA is still a factor in today's lesson. And recall that the S value stands for sine, and then it's opposite over hypotenuse. C value stands for cosine, and then it's adjacent over hypotenuse. And the T value stands for tangent, and it's the opposite value over the adjacent value. So these examples all are pretty similar. We're just going to go over a couple of them together, and the rest you're going to do by yourself. But the first example, or the first two examples, we are specifically using angle X. So we're looking to find angle X in both of these examples. So for the first example, number 1, I just indicated where angle X is, and now I'm going to label my sides. So the opposite side is always across from the angle, and the hypotenuse never changes, so the hypotenuse and the opposite side are the two sides that we are given. So based on this information, it appears that we are going to be using the sine function. So we're going to be using the SOH part of SOHCAHTOA. When I write this, just be very mindful of how I write this. I'm going to write it like we did yesterday, which is sine of the angle X is equal to my opposite side over my hypotenuse. But I can't write this, or I can't type this into my calculator. So I need to use the inverse. And how I am going to change this into using the inverse is I'm going to indicate that I'm looking for the measure of angle X, and it's equal to the inverse, which appears to look like a little -1 exponent, but it just indicates that we're using the inverse of 6 over 10. And this that I'm highlighting is what you type into your calculator. So if we go to Desmos Scientific and we hit function, you can see that the second row down under function is sine, cosine, and tangent, the inverse values of these. So I just screenshotted my screen so I can highlight what I'm talking about. I'm talking right here. So you click on function and then you use the inverse values. All right, our value again is the inverse sine of 6 over 10. So I'm going to hit inverse sine and then 6 divided by 10. My answer over there on the right side of my screen is 36.8698, and the directions here tell us to round to the nearest degree, so we'll be rounding this to 37 degrees. That's telling us that the measure of angle X for number 1 is 37 degrees. For number 2, we're still working with the angle X. And if I look at angle X and I label my sides, I have the adjacent side with respect to this angle, and I have the hypotenuse. So those two sides fit into the CAH part of SOHCAHTOA, which tells us we're using cosine, and it's the adjacent side over the hypotenuse. So cosine of angle X is equal to 15 over 20. Now you could simplify this right now if you want to. I probably wouldn't because we're typing it into our calculator anyways, so that would just be one extra step. But from here we need to change it to the inverse, which tells us we're looking for the measure of angle X, and it's equal to the cosine inverse of 15 over 20. I go to my calculator. I use inverse cosine of 15 divided by 20. And over there on the right side of my screen, rounded to the nearest degree would be 41 degrees. So in number 2, the measure of angle X is equal to 41. Okay, the whole second page is just practice. I'll put my answers up here for you to compare yours to, but you should be trying to do this by yourself. Please let me know if you have any questions.